Hi, my name is Camille and I don't hate myself anymore. It's good to meet you. I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself, how I got here. At one point in my life, I was doing everything I thought I wanted to do. Working my dream job, commuting every day to the city, and feeling pretty limitless in life. But I was miserable. Something wasn't right. I couldn't tell what was wrong exactly, I just knew that I had felt this way for as long as I could remember. While my professional life was taking off, I was falling apart. I'll talk more about that later, but to give you the short story, I ended up in therapy and an eating disorder recovery program. And without a job. My therapist was good, rigorous, but we kept hitting a wall when it came to my progress. I couldn't understand why I couldn't talk it out and just get better. There was something in the way. I described it like a wound. Like I was a wound, always open, hurting, and continually bleeding out. Emotional haemophilia. Nothing was making the bleeding out stop. Every interaction, every minor to major inconvenience made sure that wound never closed. I didn't understand what was standing in the way of my healing, why I couldn't ever seem to just get better despite the work I was doing. You need to love yourself, my therapist told me one day, and I looked at her as if she misspoke. I had heard it before. It's a pretty common turn of phrase nowadays. Love yourself, on t-shirts and tote bags, in blog posts and videos most commonly associated with bubble baths, glasses of wine and scented candles. The thing is, I'd tried all that. And it hadn't worked. I didn't understand what my therapist was saying and what she was telling me to do, in the same way I would have felt if she'd asked me to on the spot conjure up a tree or a small animal from thin air. After one of those frustrating sessions of being told again I needed to love myself, but neither of us knowing how practically to explain how to do that, I slammed my laptop shut, tilted my head back and said out loud, "How the do I love myself?" The next few months, without even realizing it, I began to learn how to do it. I just didn't know that that was what I was doing, and everything I learned and the tools I picked up along the way are now the contents of this podcast. But it wasn't easy. Self-love. Deep down, I knew it wasn't bubble baths and scented candles. I knew there was something wrong culturally with our understanding of self-love if I couldn't find a straight answer on how to do it anywhere. I began reading book after book on healing and self-discovery, going through my own deep internal work in therapy and beginning to put the pieces together. A comprehensive set of knowledge and actions that actually made sense. Beginning to understand that self-love was not at all like the rose-coloured wishful thinking consumerist crock of it seemed to be in society, helped me to let go of my expectations and just do what worked. Self-love is deeper than that, harder than that, and far more important. Along the way, I learned a couple of things. Lesson 1. Our world has a self-love problem. According to the World Health Organization, more than 700,000 people die of suicide every year. For every one suicide, there are many people who attempt it. The UK charity Calm estimates 125 deaths by suicide every week, just in the UK alone. Collectively, smoking, alcohol and drug use kills 11.8 million people each year. This is more than the number of deaths from all cancers. The harm we're doing to ourselves isn't random and without cause. It's estimated that about 85% of the world's population are affected by low self-esteem. Self-destruction is one of the main symptoms of a lack of self-love. Self-destructive behaviour is only acted on if your goal is to self-destruct. So why do so many people want to do this? Want to destroy themselves or feel like they don't have a choice? Where is the healthy self-protective instinct we're all supposed to be born with? A destruction and disregard of the self is played out all around us on a daily basis, whether it be ourselves, or ones we love, or those we've only heard of. The reason I see this as a self-love problem is simple. People who love themselves don't hurt themselves like this, don't hurt themselves the way I did. So how are we supposed to love ourselves? And if it's so important for our health and well-being to do so, why couldn't anyone tell me how? And that's when it clicked. The whole self-love thing, it became less of an abstract feelings issue and rather an issue of definition. Love, as it is understood in popular culture, is elusive, indefinable, a romantic lyrical thing we're all supposed to be chasing after but can't quite find the right formula for. Love is everything and nothing. You can't quite pin it down. It's chance, lust, and destiny. It's good luck. Or is it? If this whole self-love thing was going to work, I needed a working definition I could refer back to. The more I began to heal, the definition of love changed. Lesson 2. Love is not a feeling, love is a verb, a doing word, which makes love and self-love an action. So my definition of love became a lot more practical. Love is a verb, a set of actions and behaviours that communicate the value, level or amount of worth a personal thing has to an individual. For example, I spent all my money on pizza because I love it, or I would never spend over 20 quid on a handbag, but I'll pay just about anything for a good pair of shoes. The action and the behaviour dictates the value. So with that definition in hand, self-love meant the way that I treated myself directly correlated to the value I believed I did or didn't have. Self-love was about me affirming my value, a value I didn't believe I had, so discovering why was one of the most important starting blocks for figuring out how to undo that belief. We'll get to that in later episodes. When we demystify love as an abstract pie-in-the-sky concept, a fantasy, a myth, a fluke of physiology, magic, and hormones, and translate it into a workable set of actions, it gives us the tools we need for mastery, so that love no longer becomes this elusive thing always out of our reach, but rather it is something we can connect with and utilize, something we can practice, that we can do. Then came lesson number 3. Feelings follow actions. I realized that my whole life I had been waiting to feel differently before I actually acted. On anything. On joining hobbies I was interested in, pursuing what I wanted, discovering who I am. The most common way people do this is reserving certain clothing to only be worn when they reach a certain weight. But all this does is make you feel worse. Why? Because every day you're reminded that you aren't where you want to be yet. That you aren't yet good enough. Whereas implementing concrete actions and daily practices to help you reach that goal enable you to be able to rest assured that you're one day closer to where you want to be, feeling the way you want to feel, because you're putting the work in. And most of all, you're showing yourself you deserve effort, time, patience, and respect, regardless of what stage you're in the process, not just when you have reached the goal. Actions inform outcomes. Actions inform feelings. To feel self-love, you first have to learn how to do and start doing it, and know that the feeling will eventually come. Instead of waiting for the tide to magically turn and for your feelings to precede you, you have to start doing self-love, or the actions that communicate it, before you start feeling it. Don't panic. The entirety of this podcast will explore what those actions are and how you can use them. When I started doing the things that communicated value to myself, it was uncomfortable. In fact, I hated it. I wasn't used to it. What stood in my way then was a stack of reasons and experiences that informed why my sense of value, my self-worth, was so low. Why did I not see myself as someone with value? Why couldn't I just be nice to myself and not want to vomit after? And how did I get past it, to not only believe I had value, but to continue to act on it now? We'll delve more into these roadblocks to self-love in the first few episodes, because they're important. Knowing what's stopping you from doing something is just as important as knowing how to do it. You have to know what's blocking your path and be equipped to remove it before you can keep moving forward. Preconceptions and misconceptions about self-love were my first obstacle. So today we're going to start there. This podcast will require you to lay these aside, and I know from experience that can be tough. But it's important to let go of these things if you're ever going to take a journey of self-love seriously. Letting go of the way you think your healing should look already sets you up to be pleasantly surprised. So let's start with what self-love is and isn't. Self-love is not narcissistic. This tends to be people's main bugbear when it comes to the idea of self-love. So you're telling me to be a selfish asshole, to only ever put myself first and forget everyone else. No, that's not what this is. Narcissism is in fact the opposite of self-love. Narcissism is born out of insecurity. To compensate, it is self-aggrandizing, egotistical, and deeply steeped in feelings of inadequacy and needing to be better than everyone else to feel worthy. That is not what we're doing here. Some of the main components of healthy self-love are honesty, humility, integrity, and commitment. These things don't exist in the narcissist. Self-love is not selfish. How treating yourself with kindness, dignity, and respect can ever be misconstrued as selfishness is already a wider issue that needs to be addressed on a societal level. But more than that, being generous, loving, giving, and empathetic do not require suffering, self-rejection, and a lack of boundaries. They just don't. You are much better equipped to love others when you don't feel neglected, taken advantage of, worthless, and used. Self-love is not viewing yourself as better than others, because it's not narcissism. It is viewing yourself and others with honesty, acceptance, and equity, of not viewing others as less or more valuable than you, but rather having the perspective of respect for one's own, and by extension, other people's humanity. The way you value yourself always informs the way you value others. You don't have to view yourself as less than to be generous and kind. This next one drove me crazy, because in many ways it felt like an unfair paradox. Self-love does not exist in a vacuum. We are often told love comes from within. When discussing self-love, it's assumed you're just able to do the right thing, buy the right candles, and say the right affirmations to conjure up this organic feeling of self-love within yourself that's assumed to be already there. That belief about self-love is arguably the most damaging and counterproductive barrier to actually achieving love for yourself. Self-love does not exist in a vacuum. It isn't just there. It is influenced by everything around you. Your upbringing, your environment, your social circle, and socioeconomic background. You have to acknowledge that your experience with love, in general, as it has been presented to you, and given, or not given to you, shapes the way you are able or unable to love yourself. Why? Because love is an action, and like every action, you have to learn it. You have to be shown and taught how to do it first, like crawling, speaking, and walking as a child. If self-love can be influenced by other factors, it is either continually validated or undermined in your everyday life, and you need to be aware of this to know how to cultivate and protect it. Self-love is not pointless. One common criticism of this generation is that we allegedly love ourselves too much, that one too many Instagram selfies proves you're in love with yourself, that in fact what we all need is to love ourselves less. But the statistics would disagree. Suicide, self-harm, addiction, adolescent delinquency, the list goes on. And in all these areas the numbers are shocking. They should be. And if your response to this, your idea of a solution, is for people who are so clearly struggling, is to prescribe less love, you are in fact part of the problem. Anyone who uses social media knows that loving ourselves too much isn't the problem. Insecurity is on the rise, dangerous cosmetic procedures, desperate and disturbing grabs for attention are becoming more commonplace. Not because self-love is already abounding, but because there isn't enough of it to convince people they don't need to do these things to be worthy of love and attention. If you feel that you have to prove why you deserve love to complete strangers on the internet for one, you don't have self-love. And that is why there is a point to all of this. Self-love informs your internal sense of well-being, value, emotional stability, and even self-efficacy. Your functionality and sense of peace with your place in the world all begins with your relationship with yourself. Out of what you do shows what you believe. Which leads me to what self-love is. Self-love is a good investment, first and foremost for yourself, your health and future, and then for society at large. The less people are inclined to engage in self-destructive behaviour born out of self-neglect and hatred, the more people are willing to try, to participate and find their place in the world without compromising their sense of worth, peace, or integrity. People with healthy boundaries. There are no limits to what we could achieve if self-respect and respect of others was our first priority. Self-love is not easy. Self-love takes courage. It's hard work. It's countercultural. And I'll get into that in later episodes as well. But it's not this airy-fairy, easy or convenient feeling you can decide to wake up with one day. If you're here, I'm going to go ahead and assume you already know that you have wondered, how the f do I love myself? And why is it so hard? I'm here to help you. What I will ask you to do is put aside your preconceptions, your assumptions about how this is going to go, and muster up the courage to keep going. This is a process, one with many twists and turns and stops along the way. You're going to need first courage and then honesty, the ability to be honest about your experiences and how you're feeling, because at times the reality is going to be hard to deal with, but it's necessary to move on from this place of feeling emotionally stuck, and you're going to need courage to continue to persevere through that discomfort, to believe what's on the other end of it is worth it, because self-love is a lifelong commitment. It is an action and a practice, something you learn to do, well before you start to feel it, and with any action you commit to do daily, there are going to be times you don't want to do it, that you'll be tired, upset, fed up, but have to have the perspective that continuing on is worth it. My intention isn't to bullshit you in any way along this journey. That's the whole point of this podcast, to tell you the how of how to love yourself without the BS and the frills, with some practicality for a change. Self-love isn't easy. It is not just something you wake up feeling, it's just not. And I'm not going to lie to you that it is. Self-love as an action and as a practice is a daily thing, a daily commitment, and it takes time to see the results. It just does. It takes many years and many life experiences to cause someone to dislike or hate themselves. Similarly, it takes time to undo that learning and begin viewing yourself and life from another direction. Anyone that promises you that self-love can be achieved in an instant, in one session or for a certain price, is selling you snake oil. I've been through it and I've come out the other end to tell you how I did it, how I am still doing it, and you're not going to get any fluff from me. But what you are going to get, I hope, makes all this easier for you. Clear and concise steps and processes that helped me. Consider this your step-by-step guide on how to love yourself to the best of my knowledge, without the BS, and then it's on you to do it, which leads me to my next lesson, number 4. A self-love journey is fundamentally a healing journey. Healing from all the things that stop you from adequately loving yourself in the first place. Throughout the podcast, I'll be using books by various authors who helped me piece together my own process in healing, that provided me with the wider context behind why it's so hard to love yourself, why we don't do it. Implementing the knowledge and many of the tools in those books and my own discoveries and practices helped me to finally learn how to love myself, so I sincerely hope it helps you too. This is personal to me, as someone who spent most of my life continually asking, surely there must be more to life than this. More to self-hate, anxiety, depression, self-destruction and self-harm. Surely there is more to life than this pain. Knowing now that it was all on the other side of learning to love myself, that it wasn't impossible like I thought it was, even when I was trying to do it, and that it was all worth it. I want the same for you too. What you can achieve, what you can get out of it in the long run is so worth the time and commitment it takes to get through, to heal. By loving yourself, you get your life back. I'll leave you with a story, one of mine. I bought myself a pair of earrings at a market in Paris a few years ago. They were beautiful, handmade, turquoise wrapped in gold. As soon as I put the earrings on to see how they looked, I started to feel sick. My chest tightened, a lump in my throat, my stomach began to feel queasy, and a familiar prickle of tears in my eyes. That feeling that I needed to get out of there and back to my hotel quick stat. By the time I reached the lift, I had already broken down. Not because of how the earrings looked or how reasonable they cost, but because I knew the only reason I felt like this, felt so sick and distraught, was because I felt deeply that I didn't deserve them. For no reason discernible to me, I felt like I didn't deserve to do anything nice for myself. Ever. That I should return them and get over myself. I felt unworthy, dirty, and embarrassed. Objectively, it was nothing. Just a pair of earrings. But I couldn't stomach it, doing something nice for myself because I felt fundamentally I just didn't deserve it. At that point, it was far more than earrings. It was the living metaphor I needed to understand the depth of my self-loathing at the time. It wasn't just the earrings, it was the self-neglect, the eating disorder, the shame, the self-harm, all of it indicative of how little I believed I deserved. How little I thought I was worth. Less than a few euro on a pair of earrings from a market stall. Even I knew in the depths of my denial that that was sad and probably unhealthy. When I was finally able to discuss this incident with my therapist, I asked her how I could get over it, why it felt so wrong to do things for myself, why it could go so far as to make me cry and have a panic attack in a lift. What do? I asked her. How do I not hate myself was what I was really asking. After a while of thinking, my therapist leaned back, and what I was not expecting her to say plainly and clearly was this: you keep buying yourself the earrings. Honestly, I considered finding another therapist. What? Seeing the panic on my face, she thankfully clarified. It's not about the earrings, Camille. It can be anything. It's not about shopping or vanity either. It's about choosing you, even when everything in you is screaming for you not to. That means buying yourself the earrings even when you believe at first you don't deserve them. Looking after yourself when you think you don't deserve it. Being kind to yourself when you want to yell and scream at you. Each little action you do has a cumulative effect. It challenges those beliefs that are programmed in you, that tell you you're unworthy and don't deserve kindness. By feeling it and doing it anyway, you prove that belief wrong. And it gets easier. Right there were the bare bones of how to love myself, before I even realized that was what it was. Because love is a doing word. Love is an action. How many of you have had experiences like that, when your feelings of low worth have reared their ugly head at inopportune times and sent you running out of a room, reeling for hours in embarrassment and berating yourself, returning an item you really wanted, or worse, self-harming, self-sabotaging, dealing with an addiction or an eating disorder, punishing yourself for every little infraction you catch yourself doing, standing in the way of your ability to feel any joy because self-hate convinces you that those sort of feelings don't belong in someone like you. How many of you know deep down that you can't continue to live believing that that's true? And I'm here to tell you that it's because it's not. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Learning to love you, learning to do love to and for you. It's where the breakthrough begins. It's where that dark mass, the void, that all-consuming pain begins to crack open and finally let some light in. It's where the wound is allowed time to rest and heal. Thank you for joining me on the first ever Love Yourself podcast. And I look forward to this journey we're going to go on together. And listener, if no one's ever told you, or if no one ever meant it, you deserve love. Now go love yourself. As always, the episode resources and references, disclaimers and social media links will be in the show notes and description. The uncensored audio podcast episodes are available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Details on how to support the podcast are also listed in the show notes and description if you feel so inclined. If you would like access to the uncensored vodcast of the episode you just watched, as well as journal prompts and reading material, this is available through Patreon membership. Sign up to the mailing list to keep up to date with what happens next with the channel and the future of the podcast. All of this information and more about us can also be found on the Scattered Seeds website. Bye.